Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from beautiful Florida. And today our question comes to us from Bill Storm. And Bill tells us that in adolescence he had great access to psychic abilities which seemed to come more or less unbidden. And this included magical manifestation, it included a certain amount of clairvoyance, it included ability to work with the weather, etc. And he used this more or less unconsciously in many ways, and he believes that he drew at least two relationships to him, and that the second of these two relationships was rather a disaster. And after this, all of this vanished. After that second disastrous relationship, his psychic abilities really were no more. Now he's trying to reopen them, and he's wondering if I have any advice that might be helpful, and indeed I do. When people have psychic abilities that seem to come to them unbidden and without work to develop them, I believe they're pulling them through from past lives. And when we talk about things like conscious incarnation, we're talking about doing this in a very mindful, intentional way, but most people aren't doing it in a mindful, intentional way. It's just simply happening. And I believe it's part of the natural development of humanity, and I think it's just part of the nature of how things are. But when you can be mindful of it, of course, it's much better, because what happens is when it comes unbidden, you don't really understand it. You remember it, but you don't remember everything, and sometimes what you've forgotten is very important. And when we come into a new life, of course, there are many new influences, and they're not always helpful in terms of how to properly use manifestational ability. And in terms of Bill's story, what we see is someone who has brought through tremendous psychic abilities from a past life, but used them in a way that caused negative repercussions in the current life and then shut them down. How do you open them back up? Well, there are many different things you can do, but the most important, in my opinion, is to work with a series of lessons or exercises for psychic development that are structured and build one upon the other in a sensible and sequential way. And this will help you to redevelop those muscles, but also to develop them in a way that you have control over them. And of course I recommend my own lessons because they do exactly that, but I'm sure they're not the only ones that do that. What you want is something that is systemic and that deals with control of the abilities, not just with developing them. And one of the issues that I believe Bill is experiencing is fear of lack of control. And in reopening these abilities, addressing that fear is very important, and shadow work is vitally important to addressing that. So I would recommend working with whatever kinds of shadow work you may be familiar with, but if you're not familiar with anything, I would recommend doing the following. Examining your feelings and your emotions about psychic abilities, and also about those things that happened in your past. Asking yourself what you're afraid of, asking yourself what you think will happen. And write down everything that comes to you on a piece of paper. Write it all down, follow it as far as you can, and have no judgment in doing so. This is a matter of where your mind takes you, what you associate with these things, because chances are you don't see it all. And in fact, you might want to do this more than once. But you'll come up with a list of many different ideas, beliefs, and fears, some of which may have been hidden from your consciousness. And you want to go through these, perhaps the following day, and look at them again and ask yourself, do I really believe this? And you'll get one of two answers, either yes you do or no you don't. If your answer is no you don't, then you can dismiss it. If your answer is, well, maybe I do, then you want to ask yourself, should you? And you may find that in certain cases you really need to reprogram your thinking. And you can look at certain things where you may have a fear or a limiting belief system and say to yourself, well, that isn't necessarily true. Or just because it was this way before doesn't mean it must be this way again. Things can be done differently. Go through and work with your understanding of these things. Then, when you've done that, you want to take those limiting belief systems that you're prepared to let go of, those things that you don't really believe or that don't serve you, write them all down, burn them, and send them away in a basic burning. I've often said a basic burning is a very simple thing that is almost childish when you look at it, but tremendously transformative if you allow yourself to go with it. And of course you have to have belief, you have to be willing to let go of these things. But if you're willing to allow it to work, it works beautifully. And this is part of the understanding of magic. It all has to do with belief and willingness. And you can shut it all down by either not believing it or not being willing to let it happen. So you want to make sure that when you are doing a burning, you don't stop and think, oh, this is silly, because that will stop it. You want to actually put your energy into it, you want to put yourself into it, but within that context, it's a wonderful symbolic act to release these things, and it works with your subconscious beautifully. So I would recommend that, coupled with sensible psychic exercises, as the best way to reopen these abilities. And I think that you'll find that having done those two things, they'll come very quickly. And then, of course, you want to remember to use them in a way that doesn't cause negative consequences, although life being what it is, you never always see that, but you certainly can see it a little bit better by applying things like the Wiccan Rede. And we've talked about the Wiccan Rede at great length in many vlogs, so I'm not going to go into it here, except that you want to use your abilities in ways that are not harmful to others, but are beneficial to you. So those would be my thoughts on the matter. I hope you find them helpful, and until next time, may you blessed be. The Tarot of Hecate. My 100-card tarot deck, 30 years in the making, finally available to you from witchschoolstore.com. Check out a copy today.